there's a remarkable photographic essay by one of New Orleans' native sons, a graduate of Jesuit High School, a graduate of the University of New Orleans. He went on to be a pilot instructor for the U.S. military, and overcame his own fear of flying, I might add, to do that. And then went off on a long journey in a Volkswagen bus from Europe across Asia Minor to Nepal, I believe. And in the course of that self-discovery, of course, inevitably ended up in Asheville, North Carolina, because there's no other logical place to be other than New Orleans, which he had already been, and he now bridges both those worlds. And while he can best speak for himself and will be presenting his work, I will tell you that before I ever met Ralph Burns personally, when I first saw his work, the thing that struck me dramatically, and I think you will notice this in many of the images that he will be showing and talking with you about, is he shoots from the inside out. He manages to become part of the intimate space of his own subjects. And I think you'll find that, oh, and Owen Murphy, I'm sorry, I'm looking around at the photographers. Okay. The synapses are so slow. This is why they're putting me out to pasture. Another great photographer, sorry.
Thank you, Michael.
That's all right, I just, who is that guy? But you will find that Ralph's photographs have that capacity to shoot from the inside out and thereby capture the power of that moment. Without further ado, my new best friend, Ralph Burns.
I actually think the best thing for me to do at this point is to say nothing. There's nothing I can do to top that. When David emailed me and asked me if I would like to be in Louisiana Cultural Vistas, there was a certain tone of, would you be so kind? I remember the world before Louisiana Cultural Vistas existed, and I was so happy and thrilled to be asked to be in that publication. When I left New Orleans in 1975 and moved to Asheville, I would come back, my mom and dad were still alive, and I have 4 brothers here, and I would find myself trying to find information about my own history and also the history of this place. And to do that was a very laborious process. You either went to libraries, universities. If you were lucky, you found a book somewhere. There was not one place that brought together the incredible information that resides in so many minds and hearts in this area. And in the 90s, I came and I was on one of my jaunts somewhere, and I saw a copy of Louisiana Cultural Vistas. And I was stunned, and I must say jealous. And jealous is kind of funny because there was no way in the world I could ever do anything like that. But I recognized immediately what was taking place. And I think we're all so lucky that Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities has done that, and we are lucky that there is a repository of the knowledge in this area and that we can access it online. That's the other point, is we couldn't find anything. I sound like I'm 150 years old. Which brings me to this. These images that we're going to look at tonight, and I hope there's time to get into some more contemporary work, are 40 years old, 38, 39, 40, many of which, in fact most of which I hadn't seen. I hadn't seen until David got in touch with me, and then Rick Rubin got in touch with me, and we talked, and we thought it might be a really nice approach to go back to some of the original work, the stuff that really enabled me and set me on this path as a documentary photographer. My path here was, I came back from India, Nepal in '73 and got a job working on the oil rigs because I thought that'd be fun. And it didn't take me long to realize how difficult that was. I started hanging out at a camera store in the West Bank called Westside Camera. There weren't photography schools. I don't think any university in 1973 had a degree in photography. You really learned either on your own or you hung out in a place like Westside Camera. And I just need to acknowledge tonight, there are 3 people here, CJ O'Quinn and his wife Marianne and their brother Wayne, who owned and ran that camera store. And they are indeed the people who gave me my legs. I moved on with their patience, their understanding, and their forgiveness, and they gave me a lot of room to work. And I think often. So let's go look at, I came back to New Orleans and I realized that I always thought, my degree is in political science from University of New Orleans, and as a way of avoiding the draft, I was offered a route in the military that I thought was safe, and it turned out that I'm alive and I didn't kill anyone. But that war was a terrible thing, and it was a crushing thing, and I think those of us of a certain age will remember those years. Awful things happened. Terrible assassinations, riots. Czechoslovakia had a moment and then a deposing. I responded to that in 1972, the first month of that year, by leaving the country. And I did it to gain some perspective. And during that journey, it was a 2-year journey. I drove basically to India, stayed in Afghanistan for quite some time, which is a really wonderful country. I realized that I needed to express something, and I wasn't going to be able to do it in writing, that I needed another tool, and photography became that tool. And I came by it honestly. It just developed, and I realized that I needed to come back here and start working as a photographer. So I came to New Orleans, and with the help of the O'Quins and my own unwillingness to do nothing, I started photographing the city. Now if I could only find the keyboard. Oh, here it is. Brian and I have spent some time today. So I'm going to go through this. I'm going to try to have time, if we have time, I guess that's a redundancy, to get to some more recent work. But this is a bar on Rampart Street called the Old Loyalty. There was a great bar, and they had a boxing ring in there. And you could go drink and watch men battle it out and make bets. It was on the corner of Poydras and Carondelet, I think, called Curly's. And I would just go hang out. What can I say? I love this. It's not as sharp as I wish, but up in the top there it says, this is the house of God and the gate to heaven. I mean, it's such a sweet sentiment. It's such a sentiment that we all probably scoff at. This was in the produce market in the French Quarter. I used to hang out at the Penny Arcade. What can I say? It's the clothes. I really like the guys. I just thought that was great.
Good old days.
Good old days. It was a grave worker. That was in Algiers. One of the things I was struck by, I grew up, my first year of going to Jesuit, I grew up in Gretna. I crossed a ferry boat across the river. Sometimes that ferry boat was a coal-fired internal paddle wheel ferry boat, on the walls of which were stenciled colored and white. And I got on public transportation in the city that still, and that was the year it changed, still had movable signs. And I watched people having to get up from their seats because another person of different color got on and decided to pick that sign up. My last year of high school was the year of the integration of the public school system in New Orleans, and it was a horrific year. It was a terrible year. The vile, the vitriol, the meanness was just everywhere. But this just went on in the background. I mean, I was very aware of this. When I came back to the city, after being gone for a number of years, it struck me that this city was held together, built by African Americans. And that is in no way disrespectful to other people. It's just to say that the quotidian, the daily labor, the work that every place needs was done to a great extent by African Americans. And I found myself being drawn more and more to that community. And it was as much of a sense of self-exploration as it was a sense of documentation. In fact, I think that the camera sometimes is only a way to allow me to go out and explore myself. And I have to have a reason to do that. I once remarked to a friend that I'd be as happy if there wasn't film in the camera. Just having that as a reason to go out. Which brings me to something else. I still shoot film. And I still make my own prints in a darkroom on fiber-based paper, a skill I learned with Wayne Oakland. We spent many a nights in a little darkroom Wayne had built in Algiers in a house, and we used to do a little substance abuse and go in and print for 8 hours, and you can become very detailed-oriented when you're doing that. So I still do film, and I still make my own prints, and collectors buy my prints, and I spend a great deal of time doing that. More cemetery workers in
Where is that?
that is in Tremay, near I cannot tell you which street. I can probably figure it out. Michael's going to get mad at me for this, but there's a certain lack of sharpness in color cast that's happening up here that's not happening here. If you can see the monitor, these are really nice files. If you can see this monitor, these are crisp black and white images. I just love that voice. I just love, he and I had this most magnificent, and see, he got up and left. We had this most magnificent interaction, but he just gave me this wonderful look. A.L. Davis's church, New Zion Baptist Church. And I went in the church, and they were very kind, but they got annoyed at the cliques.
Ralph, I'm going to approve you.
Thank you, Michael. I love you too. Yeah, that's it. So I photographed anywhere. And this is, if I was out and I went in the bathroom and there was something going in the bathroom in Bourbon Street or French Quarter, I said, can I take your picture? I have so many of these things. So this guy just turned around and just posed. And I just put it in there because it's funny. Bourbon Street, again, that's very, very sharp on my monitor. I just want to point this out. It's what we take for granted that I always find most challenging. It's like we really go through. I've been back in the city for 2 days and I'm already not seeing. I mean, yesterday I was driving through the city and I was exploding with, every place I look. Today I'm driving now in a different way and I can feel this happening. And it's one of the things that being a photographer helps you to do is to stay attuned. This is a quick little series of, there was a little small camera that I borrowed for long term from Wayne. It was a little half-frame camera. And I used to sneak into Charity Hospital, because I thought that was an important part of the story. I used to sneak into the hospital and try to record what was going on there. And they were so successful at kicking me out that I never went back eventually. But it was clearly a place where mostly African Americans were getting their medical service. It was clearly something that said something good about us as a society. It's not there anymore. So get through this. It was one of my neighbors. I did a little portrait work just because I love this boy's face also. So again, 39 years. It was quite a treat for me finding these images. There was a restaurant, Buster Homes, which was, those of you of a certain age, again, it was the great red beans and rice emporium for about 95 cents or 75 cents. Maybe without a pork chop, it was 55 cents.
35 originally.
35 cents, I knew that somebody would know. And I was just a traveler. I have lots of billboard photographs throughout my whole career, if we can call it that. And these "Thou shalt not kill" boards in New Orleans just absolutely jumped out at me, and they still jump out at me. And we're still fighting the same battles. It's still heartbreaking to see. This was an all-night, 24-hour church on Bourbon Street. She didn't have many people yet that night. You know, one of the things tonight that I've really liked is the subtext that's been going on. I mean, we've had these great discussions, but riding right under the discussions that we are having is a whole nother set of discussions. And I mean, I'm still reeling with this idea of a slave breeding plantation. I mean, that's been in my head all night since that was said. You know, there's all these other stories. And one of the things about this, the subtext of this, and again, I didn't know this existed until 6 months ago, is that tension that has always been in this city, and in probably every area in which part of the population was held in slavery or held in contempt or held in whatever, between the people with power and the people who don't have power. And for me, this, when I saw it on, as I was going through negatives, it was like, oh, there it is. I mean, that's, you know, we from a very early age, if you grow up a certain color, are given fears. And those fears are based on appraisals, history, just basic paranoia. So that image for me works very successfully. Whoops, Brian?
You can do it.
I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I did do something. Okay, what do I do here? He told me, but you know. Wait, we're going to get it here. Okay, where are we, Brian? I'm still need you, I can tell. Right click. Yeah, that's.
We had this great moment together this afternoon with this.
It worked, and then.
Yeah, I'll always remember that.
Yeah. We worked, and there was some color stuff I did in Rick Gruber's article, and he was very kind and generous. He mentioned that I was experimenting with different kinds of films, and you know. This is where digital today is so superior. I mean, with a digital camera, and this doesn't have the same tonality that I'm looking at here, but with a digital camera, you would nail that today. I had probably a film that had a 400 exposure ISO, and it was probably pushed process. So it was very difficult then to do some of the work that today digital is making much easier. This group was always in the French Quarter. And to my knowledge, they never collected money. They were a gospel group. And they would come into the French Quarter and they would set up on street corners and just play. And they were quite beautiful. And one year I came back and they just weren't here anymore. That's the shrine of St. Anne and Ursulines.
St. Anne, send me a man.
Oh, darling, you know the story.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's praying that. I don't think that's his. This I went by the other day. All of this is gone. That Bruce Bryce mural, which is really, I mean, if you ever want a story about eviction and gentrification, Bryce covered the whole thing in that mural. It's just all gone. I don't even know if I couldn't figure out whether that building with the wall was on is even there anymore. But it's now a fence which runs along that whole strip. That's Gretna. See, Gretna's beautiful. People don't want to accept Gretna's beautiful, but that's an interesting place. And this one I put in, we just put it back in because I'd taken it out. It's Congo Square. And when Matt showed that image earlier, that drawing, it was like, wow, there's some body language there. Okay.
Do you know his name? Because he looks like somebody I taught. They came from New Orleans
Yeah.
over to Slidell, was in a residential treatment center, and then came into my classroom.
He could have been. I don't remember.
What year is that?
You know, that would be 74. And he just has that look again, that face. It's something so direct. Oh, wait. Okay, now we're back to Brian. We're back to Brian again because I didn't watch what you were doing. Oh, here we go. No, do it anyway. Imagine. Okay. This is some more recent work in New Orleans. I haven't worked in New Orleans much since '75 when I come back to see family. I'm sorry? Oh. When I'd come back to see family, I'd always try to sneak off and do some work. Here's stuff that's been done in the last 10 years or so. That was last year. You'll see in a moment I do a lot of religious. I was in Barataria. I don't limit myself to the city limits. There was a Martin Luther King Day parade in Marrero. I love this. This is on the road to Cocodrie. And, you know, we all live our lives and things happen to us and we never really get our full stories, much less anyone else's. This little thing was sitting in the marsh grass, and as I went by it, the wind was blowing, and it just sort of said, "Stop, come see me." And it says, "Mama prayed for you, Wendy," is what's on that thing. "Mama prayed for you, Wendy." And then at the bottom it says 11 of 12 children. And for some reason, it just sort of summed everything up for me. I mean, it's how it turns around. It's how it's all fading. So a little Cocodrie journey. And this was the first Mardi Gras after Katrina. I had a Hasselblad X-Pan, which gives you a long negative, and just did some street work using it. Okay, we'll do this one more time, and we're, where are we here? Okay, so I'm gonna quickly, whoops, maybe I'm gonna quickly.
And go to the upper left,
Upper left,
from beginning.
from current slide?
No.
Time. Okay,
That'll work.
so we're gonna go through it real quick, and when time's up, Brian, just stop me because this can go on. This is more current work, and this is really getting into the heart of what I do. This is in Israel, Palestine. I'm really drawn to our species' need to define our lives in a theological sense, as opposed to an existential sense, just dealing with ourselves as a species. And a lot of the work I do is around worship and people telling us how to worship. This is at a tent revival in North Carolina. Baptism in the Jordan River. This woman, I mean, I was crying when I took this photograph. I was crying because I've never seen such a struggle in my life. This went on for 8 or 9 minutes. Behind me were about 15 folks who she was traveling with who were singing gospel music. And she wanted to be baptized, but being baptized is the last thing in the world she wanted to do. And she struggled, and she cried, and she'd almost get into the water, and she'd fight back. It was almost like watching someone dying as opposed to someone being reborn. And eventually she just let herself go, and they carried her out of the Jordan River, and she heaved and sobbed for about a half an hour. I don't know what, I had to go, but I don't know whatever happened. One of the projects that the project that brought me notoriety, and it's a project that this work has been in the Tate in Liverpool, and numbers of solo exhibitions of this work, was a 30-year project, actually 29, of Elvis fans. And it's not done from a making fun point of view. It's sort of it was an exploration of worship, love, and the transference that takes place when love is lost. So interspersed of these will be slides from Graceland. I also noticed this time, more than ever, when I was putting this together, how many young men I have in my photographs, and how we are taught what we're taught, and the roles that we then grow up in to become. There was a woman in South Carolina named Susan Smith who murdered her 2 children by drowning them in a lake in her car. She blamed it on a black man. Man got my car, stole the car, kids are gone. And of course, you know, within 3 days they realized she was lying. And I tend to go to these shrines that's set up, and this was a shrine. I don't know if you can read that in there, but it says Michael and somebody, and Alex are with Jesus. I love you. This was at a apparition site, Marian apparition site. It was a healing. We were praying on this man. It's a healing in Cuba, a Santeria healing. It just is what it is. We do mix our metaphors in life. It's a baptism, obviously, in the Cane River in North Carolina. A little boy, that little pamphlet says Jesus Christ on it, of course. That's Bertha's funeral. That's that little boy's grandmother. And how we learn about death and how we learn about our own death is very interesting to me. And that process, and how we first come to terms, and I think a lot of our behavior in life is predicated and determined by how we come to accept our own life and our own death. From one box to the other. This was at a gathering in Washington. They had these prayer teepees set up where men would go in. It's called Promise Keepers. And men would go in and sort of pray with other men. Gaza. Cuba. This guy had been crawling for a couple of days to get to the shrine of San Lazaro, or Lazarus. Quintana Roo, Mexico. Good Friday. Cuba again. Jerusalem, that's a Christian, Ethiopian Christian, obviously Jerusalem. At the Hotel, the Westin Wall. That's at Graceland. They have a yearly, on the night of Elvis's death, they do a candlelight service. I think there's a picture of the gathering later on in here. That's a Sephardic woman in a town called Meron, which is up in kind of near Safat, which is kind of one of the spiritual centers of Israel. Oh, that's at Graceland. That is a full moon, New Age Shabbat service on a hillside outside of Jerusalem. That's the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. I just love the image of the burden as well as the image of the freedom. We're close. This was in Tel Aviv. This period was a very difficult period. It was, it seemed like every week a bus was blowing up. And this young man and that one behind him were both waiting to get on the bus. And it was something you sensed and felt everywhere. I don't know. Thailand. That's it. We're done.